Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our role-playing campaigns. So with me, I've got a very, very special guest with me here today. We've got Ty from Side Quest Podcast. Hello, Ty. How are you?
That would actually be Side Character Quest.
Well, that is embarrassing. I will try that again. We'll keep it in the recording. So Side Character Quest. Very excited. So Ty, tell us all about Side Character Quest.
Yeah, so Side Character Quest, it is an actual play Dungeons and Dragons 5e show. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we dip into other systems, but hey, more or less 5e is where we stick. Mm-hmm. And what makes it different is, although everything is set in a single, shared universe, a shared setting, each different quest is following a different player character, and 99% of the time it's just one player character. So we bring somebody in, take them on an adventure through this shared world, and then move on to the next story. And it's really fun because you can dip in and listen to just one of the adventures, or if you like it, then you can listen to more. And as you listen to more, you're like, oh, I remember that NPC. They're treating that guy like they're an ally, but I know that NPC from that other quest is actually a bad guy. Oh no. So lots of overlap. That's really fun to play with. That's
so cool because it feels like a very unique concept, because obviously we consider our PCs, our player characters, as the heroes sort of thing. We don't tend to, it's as selfish and sort of introverted or sort of self-centeredness as it is, we tend not to look at those other characters that appear in the side bits. So it feels like to be a mixture of sort of almost like Game of Thrones style. You got all these different narratives overlapping slightly, but also in a way, I don't know if you ever read Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell as well, where
not.
So I will say your podcast is nothing like that, but it just reminds me of it. It's this idea in Cloud Atlas that you have 10 stories, and each story is sort of in each of them. They sort of stop halfway, but it's the same people are living through the stories, and some of them will have very small parts of the story. Some of them will be all about them, and it's just a way to connect the narratives in a way. But I love that idea that you as a listener would know a lot more than the people that play it, which is fascinating. So, well, let's start right at the beginning then. So how did you get into role-playing games, and then how did you come up with the concept of Side Character Quest?
I got into D&D. I think I technically played it when I was maybe 11 with my brother, and it did not go well because older brother, little brother dynamics, not great for a D&D situation always. But I didn't really get into it until college. I played with a large group of people, like 8 people at my first table, which is too many. Eventually we narrowed that down to 3 or 4 players and then the DM. So for a table of like 4 or 5 people that has stuck around, even now I'm still playing games with them off pod. What led to me starting Side Character Quest specifically, there was a few things. One is I just generally wanted to do podcasting just for fun, to challenge myself, do something new. I also wanted to be able to do a game that did not rely on having, 3 or 4 people always available. So the fact that I can, expect a large commitment from somebody for 2 months of recording and then we're done was very, very helpful logistically. And then I had a third point as well. I don't remember what that was.
No, I think that second point and the first point, because I similarly, I got into podcasting purely because I wanted to challenge myself, and that I had a lot of RPGs and I didn't see my friends enough. So those sort of 3 pillars sort of interconnected as well. So the world yourself, did you build that with your friends initially, or was that a whole sort of thing yourself? Because obviously it's the same world, but you have different players come in and, like you said, only here for a month or so. Is it something that is organic in the sense of it's always still being created, or have you got like a big set overarching thing that's going on?
I have an incredibly hard time pre-planning things.
I can imagine.
That's why I do homebrew. I have a hard time, reading through an entire booklet and getting it all locked to my brain. And I have a hard time writing out everything in advance. So when I started SCQ, I came up with a very vague history of the world that I could have in my brain. I came up with a central plot, like we're talking about Side Character Quest. I came up with the main character's quest that is happening in the background at all times. And then I drew a map and did the classic draw a map, leave empty spaces. And so whenever I would start I'd bring somebody on, I would have people pitch characters they wanted to play. And then, if they had an idea of a particular type of quest they would like to go on, or if they just had, here is a character idea that I have, then I would work back and forth with them to figure out, okay, where does this fit in the pre-existing world?
Cool.
If it doesn't fit in the pre-existing world, what can we add to the world to make this fit?
Yeah.
And that's been so much fun, like making everything fit. And at this point, things are still flexible enough, but also fleshed out enough that it's fun, not challenging, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
From this sort of way of designing your game and sort of talking to other people, it is so flexible and so creative and collaborative compared to traditionally, and I say that in quotation marks, about we see the game, it is the DM, their world, their campaign, and the players are playing in it and they can affect it, but it's not as much like they create stuff. So the fact that you have that discussion about what kind of quests they want to go on, even if it could just be like, I just want to go on like an errand quest or anything like that, that's still, like you said, you have to work out. That's really interesting. And yeah, just to date then, how many people have come into your world and not ruined it? That's not the way I say it, but have made their mark on your world, would you say?
Let's see. I would say we've had somewhere in the realm of, I'm not sure the exact number. I think it's somewhere around 15, that give or take a few. And there are some people who, came in really early on and were able to or at any point in the series, people who slot in a very natural way and, come and go. And then I can sort of find ways to link their actions into other stuff. But then I've had other people who, especially when somebody is a listener to the show, I will work with them to be like, okay, I know that this person is really interested in the Salton Sea as like a locale. I'm going to come up with a way for their actions to have a dramatic effect on that location, and plays out in a very dramatic fashion. Yeah, I don't know. It's also really fun though when somebody doesn't know what's going on.
Of course, yeah.
I have a quest hasn't been released yet, and I'm going to be vague about it.
Be vague. Yeah. Spoilers, absolutely. Yeah.
I had so much fun because the person that was coming on, I knew that he didn't know anything about SCQ, and he was like, "Should I listen in advance?" And I was like, "No.
Yeah,
I am counting on you to not know what's going on. The long-time listeners are going to be listening to this and be like, no, don't do that. Yeah. No, don't do that. That'll be awful. And you won't have any idea. And that'll be wonderful to play with. And I just love that dramatic irony that you can work with.
It's so different. I don't know any other actual players that work with that without the player already knowing that's the bad guy, that's the villain. Like if you have a person that pops up and like a name gets mentioned and only some people would recognize it, it's such a rare thing to have an actual play. So I think that's such an interesting concept of it. So yeah, kudos for that. Yeah. It's very interesting. So then let's talk about the topic you've brought to us today. So what is our topic of choice?
We are looking at First Blush, which is a pre-written campaign, a module, I guess, for introducing people to the idea of one-on-one D&D adventures. I really wanted something like this. I wish I had something like this when I first started at SCQ. I did not write this. No. I don't remember the names of the people off the top of my head.
Sorry, I will look for it whilst you are bad for time. So yeah. For it.
I would have loved to have something like this because there's so many things that, especially if you listen back to the early arcs of SCQ, you'll hear me kind of figuring out some things about how to handle one player that if I had read this, I would have been like, oh, of course. It gives you so many little tips on common foibles and, problems you can run into along the way of doing your first one-on-one campaign. It's also set up as like a general introduction to D&D, like assuming that the player has never played before, which I thought was really interesting. it feels like the point of this, and tell me if you agree with what I'm about to say. Please. I don't remember if they specifically said this, but it feels like the point of this is if someone is in a relationship and they really like Dungeons and Dragons and their partner has never tried it and is intimidated by like a full campaign with like 5 or 6 people. And they're like, okay, I'll just do one little adventure for you to show you how everything works. Does that sound right?
You know, I hadn't considered it, but absolutely. So this is written by Jonathan and Beth Ball, who run a website called D&D Duet. So you're right. It's that sort of idea of these one-on-one adventures, like one DM, one player, etc. And it's so true. I had kind of forgotten that phenomena because it never happened with me and my partner. I was too busy already reading the books and going, right, when's my campaign? But we do have that, right? We have that thing where I want them to watch a TV show. I really want them to watch that. Here's a board game. I want to get them to that. And it's very overwhelming if you are coming into a group of people who already have that level of knowledge and you don't. And certainly for me, when I play other RPG games that aren't necessarily Dungeons & Dragons, but aren't games that I don't know very well, and I've been invited on a stream to do it, I do have that sense of going, oh God, I wish I could do something about it. So the way I get through it as a player, not knowing the rules, is improv. And I just come up with the weirdest character concept and they have to say yes and. Now, obviously, maybe I'm just very charismatic and charming and witty and funny and confident enough to do that. But some people aren't like that. Some people want to take part in that sort of thing and they're not sure how. So I think you're right. I think something like this, an introductory adventure for a brand new player to introduce them to all those 3 pillars, and also for the DM a little bit as well. If they're not sure about DMing as well, all the way around. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this one because for 20 pages, you get a lot in it as well.
Do you want to run over just the selection of things that are in this?
I will. So so essentially you have a couple of pages at the beginning that talks about the importance of like, why would you run D&D for one person? And it talks about, interesting enough, because we have covered it on our podcast before, we've covered the idea of sidekicks, this idea that having...
I listened to that episode. That was a very good episode.
Oh, thank you. But so this idea that you have a player character with you that can help, so you're not on your own, so that you can have at least a little moment in the spotlight, but at the same time, you can then take a moment out of the spotlight to let something else happen. It also introduces this idea of a DM player character. So this idea is on the same level. So sidekicks are seen as more of a streamlined sort of player character with less features and stuff, but easy to run. So for example, in this adventure, it suggests that you have the player has their own player character, and then they run the sidekick if they feel comfortable enough to do so. Whereas the DM would obviously run everything else, but then they would also have a DM player character, which could be the person they rescue in the adventure, or it could be the friend as well. Before we go on, I have an issue with DM player characters, not in the sense I've been on the receiving end of a bad one, is that for me as a DM, having a player character that's of the same level and maybe at the same power level of a player character, I worry so much that I know too much. And
it's so hard.
Right. And for you, I was going to say, how do you find it? First of all, do you use sidekicks or your own DM character when you're playing one-on-one in your recordings?
I never thought about them in terms of sidekick or DMPC until most recently, like reading the new sidekick rules and listening to your episode and everything with that. I had never really thought of them in that terms. I had always thought of them as an NPC that maybe the person could bring along or they could ditch. But it's always
not important, is it? Yeah, they just happen to be there. I call them quest help.
Yes. The first few adventures that I did where I had some sort of NPC helper, it was very clear that the NPC helper didn't need to be there. Like the person could ditch them. And that was, it worked out great because the person knew they're subservient. They're not going to be with me all the time. I can't rely on this person as a member of the party. One time I had an adventure where someone was playing a character that was, with their backstory, very like subservient to one of the NPCs. Not subservient. That's the wrong word. Like
indebted to them in a way?
Indebted to, I guess. Where like there was a person who was someone was their boss, like the NPC was their boss.
Right. Yeah. And they're an employee. So there's a bit of a lower state. There's a status play a little bit there. Yeah, exactly.
And I found that it was really hard to get a character who wants to be obedient and wants to behave well when they're around this boss to not just let the boss make all the decisions.
It was
very, very difficult to work with. And it's a really tricky balance. Anytime you introduce somebody, especially if they're an NPC with the same skill set as the player, has all of those abilities. Just like, it's so much to juggle. I try nowadays to make any of the any NPCs just like relatively incompetent, and it works so much better. It just works so much better. Or they'll have like motivations that very specifically do not one-to-one align with the player. Right. So, they know that at some point this person might branch off and not stay with them.
That's interesting. Yeah, because when I first started out DMing and stuff, I remember talking to somebody who had, like, they would have, again, back in the days where we didn't have sidekicks, the term for it, they did have, when they were working at it, and they said, we only have 3 players for this campaign. And they were like, look at what the composition of the party was, and nobody was playing healer. So they just created what is now obviously a sidekick, but obviously using full credit of a cleric. And all the cleric would do is in battle would just heal people. So there was no role play, no nothing. And this person just called them a heal bot. Yeah. And I was just a bit like that. For me, I understand that, but that felt so mechanical, so sort of video gamey, right? Like at that point, you just have like a god that's healing them. Like it's just so it feels so pointless. It just kind of like, again, we disagreed on a couple of things for one when we were talking about it, but I just felt that it came away from that going, that feels so sad that you were like, oh, they're going to die easily. So I'm just going to give them this to help them, I guess. And it's like, well, you should like, they don't have to, like you said, they don't have to have that alignment. They don't have to do that sort of thing. They can have their own things, but they can just be at a lower level.
Lower difficulty battles.
Exactly. I read in, I can't remember which book it was now. I think it was one of the very many like My Adventure books advice thing, where it said that if you've got lots of NPCs, they could be off-screen battling like a horde, so they don't have to take part in the battle itself. But they could be off-screen and deal with another threat. So if the city is there's a siege at the city, they could be like, we're going to go down here, good luck. And so you focus on what the character's doing and give them sort of thing as well. So I know there's different ways of putting it, but yeah, for me, just because I always have thinking of a billion things at once when I'm DMing, I worry myself is having that barrier between what I know, what the character knows, and then what I say. Because it's happened the other night where I was like, oh, don't say this. And then of course I said, oh, so the lich now attacks. And then I was like, oh, I've not been describing it as a lich though. Well, they know now. All their faces dropping in the call. I was like, yeah, well.
Oh no. This is much more dangerous than I thought.
I mean, it was pretty deadly. And you're like, oh, well, I've ruined it now. But again, it's just one of those things, chalking up to experience. Like next time, just don't say lich. But yeah, so it gives you that advice about like, how to use sidekick if they want to, DM play a character as well. And then it just talks about the structure of the adventure, whereby it says like, we think about the 3 pillars in D&D. So in case those people who don't know, Wizards of the Coast sort of have this big, great philosophy. I actually quite like it, where it talks about role-playing games, or the D&D Wizards of the Coast stuff revolves around 3 things. It's social interaction, exploration, and combat. And these 3 sort of make up what it is to play a game of D&D in your campaigns. And sometimes there might be only 2 of those columns. Maybe one of the 3 columns has a bit more presence in some of the sessions. So maybe it's a very heavy combat session. Sometimes obviously we have shopping episodes, all that sort of thing. But all 3 of them is what makes sort of your character feel more real, is that they take part in these things. So in the adventure, the First Blush, it talks about the first part of the adventure is meeting these elements individually. So the first part, the first is that you just do some role play. So then the second part, you do some combat, and then you go to do some exploration, although it's very, very short.
Very short.
And then you're into part 2 where it combines all 3.
A quick note on it being very short. I love that this, more so than any adventure I have seen or tried to build, feels like you could legitimately complete it in 2 hours.
Yeah, one session. Yeah, and I thought that as well.
That's amazing. Like you wouldn't think it's as hard as it is, but it's difficult to do something like that. So I thought it was great that they kept it as tight as they did.
I completely agree, because we've got obviously books that have come out just now. Obviously we've got the Radiant Citadel that's come out. We've got the Candlekeep Mysteries, and they're all one shots in quotation marks. We're still on.
They're so long.
They're so long. We're on session 8 of one of the Radiant Citadel ones. Don't get me wrong, we're absolutely loving it, but I thought it will wrap up in 2. But it's just so much. There's just so much in it.
I totally agree. I was I also have Radiant Citadel over on my shelf over there, and I was reading through them, and I was like, these are great. I really like these. It would take so long to get, like, it's not that it would take so long. Like they're fair, they're short, they're speedy. It's not like they're full of fluff, right?
No, they're great.
They're not a thing that you're going to get through in a breezy evening.
No,
you might get through it in a really nice Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
But
a long weekend. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I do not wish to
not to knock that.
No, we love that. I think, but I think we're both circling around that subject of going, people need to get in and enjoy it and then be okay to be like, right, I want to leave now, rather than having, as you were saying before, that sort of how long a commitment. Like for us, it's part of our Monday night games that we will always do D&D in some form, so it's not a problem. But if I said, oh, we're going to have a weekend doing this thing and then we only get through a third of it, I don't want people then to feel obligated to be like, well, did you enjoy it enough to carry on? That's whereas you're right with the first blush stuff, I easily see it as such a quick primer. And I think you're right. I think 2 hours, I think even an hour and a half, depending on how much people get into the role play of it as well.
I was just going to say that I recently, on the episodes of SCQ, that Side Character Quest that most recently came out, episode 97 and 98, I designed that to try to be a 2-episode arc, 2-episode quest that, is bringing somebody in, we would record for 2 hours, then we would come back in, record for another 2 hours. And it was really tough to make something that felt to make a I tried to make it there's a social stuff in the first episode, and then there's dungeon and combat in the second episode. And it is so difficult to make something really tight. And so it was so refreshing to come through and read this and be like, oh yeah, this works. This has the whole story arc. It hits everything. The first section of this is literally a tutorial, right? Yes. That is what is happening. Your player character is being run through a gauntlet that is designed to make them an adventurer. And it is literally a tutorial, but they make it fun. Like it feels like it wouldn't be slap in the face to a player. It would be like, oh, I'm having a good time here. And that's nice. It would be fast, but that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think, again, like I can imagine it is definitely built, as we were saying earlier, it's definitely built for brand new players. Yes. I think if you're a veteran and you wanted to play one-on-one, you would definitely have to add a little bit more to it, but there's no problem with that. I think what I wanted to point out before we sort of go on to the actual description of the adventure. Sorry, never be sorry. So it talks about role play. So the first part of it, it talks about your character is connected to or is part of some noble family. That's all very nice and good. Gives you a quick little backstory should you need it. And it talks about you will meet sort of 3 characters who are important to you. There's the scholarly sort of mentor character. You've got the combat person who's going to teach you how to combat, and then you're going to go talk to your childhood friend. And it says about encourage your player to do role play. Now, going off what you were saying before, that idea of like you are introducing someone to Dungeons and Dragons and to role play, etc., that can be very tough. I'm an improviser at heart. I love showing off. I love acting. And so I don't mind that. But I know certainly when I first did it, I was very, very nervous and actually quite anxious. And that was obviously with a whole group of people who were willing to try stuff. The only thing I would maybe change about this document is, I did read it, but I don't know if there was like a line in it that said that they're okay to speak in the third person. They don't have to be you have to put on. It doesn't say anything about character voice and accent. It says that, obviously that's by the way, we all know that. We're all clever and we all play to the top of our intelligences. But it's okay to, if somebody goes, oh, my character, I go over and says this. And that's fine. It just feels like, I think he says encourage them. I'm like, I would, but at the same time, I'm not going to push it, because we don't have time. And maybe they'll come into doing it into first person. But at the same time, I definitely have been in sessions where a lot of people are speaking in the first person. And then one person who's brand new is like, I'm going to speak in the third person because it's just not for me. I feel a bit awkward about it.
That is a very good point. And because I think there are a lot of people out there who speaking in first person would honestly be a deal breaker for them. And it feels like a wild thing to me because I really enjoy. I
think as DMs, we never see this really, because But I know some DMs do speak in the third person as well. They don't go into too much detail about it, but yeah.
I recently was playing a non-D&D RPG, and it was one of those ones where you are generating a character very, very quickly.
Which one, may I ask? Go for it.
Yes, it was. I was playing Star-Crossed.
Oh yeah,
with my partner.
Right, yes.
It was so much fun, so delightful. But you are making a character together, and it was a thing where like I was trying to speak as the person, and it was just like, this is weird because I am just like, the person was just created from scratch. I had no time to think about how they would sound, how they would act. I don't really know what their personality is like yet. And I'm trying to speak as them. I feel like that's going to, inform the way the plot goes in ways that I don't like. Whereas if I can say, oh yes, he says something to you and it comes off a little wrong, doesn't quite have the effect that he wants, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
No, I know, and I agree. And I think Starcross, that's an interesting thing about Starcross, this idea, because it's about a relationship and using that Jenga tower. So, and if it falls, something happens, and I think maybe again, it's okay if we're being. There was a bit of advice that was given recently out of Shut Up and Sit Down, and it's in Grant Howitt's Spire as well. It's like, when you're role playing, imagine that you are WWE wrestlers. That's the level of acting you should be. So as a DM, that's great. But I think, as a player, if you commit to it the first time and you're being a larger life character, but you're talking about stuff at certain topics which maybe not that you find uncomfortable, but I certainly know with Starcross, obviously it's about a relationship. So it might be like, I'm talking to my partner, I'm not so sure, etc. It's like I definitely have yet to play Starcross because of a similar thing. But it's I've read the rules of it, and it's a great game. So I'm very jealous that you got to play it.
It is very delightful. My partner and I, our first date, we were at a board game bar where we played Jenga. And so I was just like, okay, we have to play this game. Like just a quick summary for anybody that doesn't know Star-Crossed. Basic idea is that you are going through a star-crossed lovers plot line from like a movie or a book, and as things happen to increase the romantic tension between the characters, you pull out a piece of the Jenga tower, put it at the top, and once the tower falls, you act on your feelings. And that could go poorly or it could go well, depending on how well you've done up to that point. It is a delight. And one of the things that they keep saying or in the rules is be obvious. Do the obvious choice. If you're thinking, oh, is that too easy? Just do it. And whenever we had any sort of doubts about like what we should do, whether, is this too cliched? We just did it. And it made the experience so much more enjoyable, so fun. I really had a blast. I
love that. Yeah. Be obvious. That's, again, I always go back to improv on this, but they always say be obvious. There's no point in being clever because the audience won't get it, but be obvious is such a good one. So once you've sort of done that social interaction, like you said, we go into like a little gauntlet tutorial. What I quite like about this sort of, I guess maybe that is a bit of exploration in a sense, even though it's quite short, but you get a choice, a very small choice about where to go.
Very small choice.
They both end up in the same bit, but it's fine. But I do like that. I like the fact that even in this very, like you said, very tight, very sort of like this happens and this happens, sort of like structure, you go from A to B, there is still a choice a character can make, and it matters in a sense because obviously if they fail it, they have to go back and go the other route, and that's going to take a bit more time. And it's you as the DM might be like, it means the combat at the end of part one, two guards come and have that challenge for you fighting. They could be more prepared. They might be hiding in wait, both of them, all that sort of thing. So I think
maybe if you're doing poorly, the mentor like scold, just like, oh, I'm so disappointed. I really thought you'd do better than this. Oh, are you sure you're ready for this this teleportation thing that you're doing at the end of the match? Like, ooh boy.
And that's the thing. So it builds up this idea that you've been given this information that you're going to this festival in Waterdeep. you're doing your last bit of training before you're going to go and join the rest of your family. And then the last bit of that part one is go and talk to your old school friend chum, which is interesting because it's almost like a commentary that goes through, like a meta commentary saying, we found that some people actually want to take the friend with us because I guess because it's built up like you are slightly higher in status than your friend, and your friend is not jealous. It's just sad that if you go off to Waterdeep, you might never come back and I'll never see you again. Which I'm like, this friend's a bit clingy for my liking, but I don't know. I'm level 1, so I can't talk, right?
One thing they did mention in this, which I think it now is appropriate time to bring that up. They say, when you're going through this, feel free to tweak the personalities, genders, appearances, names of any of the characters based on the preference of your player. And what you just said, if your DM was like, oh, I know Fiona, I know this, she's going to find this so clingy and bad. She's not going to like this. But it's in the module. I have to do it. And I'm a brand new DM, so I don't know that you can change it. Yeah. That is good advice for somebody who's just starting and just doing this for the first time. It's a good reminder that when you're doing a one-on-one campaign, you should craft this specifically for the one person that you're playing with.
Yep.
For example, when I'm playing with somebody for Side Character Quest and we're doing our sort of initial session 0 talks, I make sure to ask them like, hey, what motivates your character? Because I can't rely on coming up with a motivation that'll work for 1 in 3 people. Because if you're the only person and you aren't motivated by this, then it's not going to work.
Right. Absolutely. When you're solo DMing as well, the idea is so kind you sort of segued into it. This idea of obviously session 0 is becoming more and more prevalent, which is great. And this idea of safety tools and stuff, also great. And I think it's so important for this one as well, because like you said, you want to make sure your player has a good time. You want them to come back, because this is only one adventure in 3, the first in the trilogy, like war. But I think for me, what I find interesting is that having a session 0 is so important for this. But like you said, again, back to improv, I always bring it up. But there's this thing where obviously we talk about our boundaries, what things are off the table, lines of veils, good stuff. But naturally, when you talk about sad things that make you sad and you want to avoid, and people want to protect people, that's totally fine. It sucks the energy out a little bit, and it feels a bit like admin. We get that. One thing I've discovered in improv is quite similar to what you're saying. We call it foundries. So it's almost like the opposite of a boundary. So what brings you joy? What's one thing you would love to see in the adventure? And it works very well in big groups as well as smaller groups as well. This idea that, for example, for me as a DM, one of my foundries is that I love crazy solutions things. So, for example, that lich example I gave earlier. So it was a tiny, tiny object, a demi-lich, and they were badly losing, right? And one of the characters went, well, this is a long shot, but could I get my bag of devouring that I gave them ages ago? Can I try and swipe or grab the thing and put it in? And I was like, absolutely.
Yeah,
right. Because that is so cool. And I just love that crazy. So that brings me absolute joy, because I think they were like, we're going to try it. And so so that's why I want to have foundries like that. So having a conversation with your players, like, what brings you joy? And they might not know straight away. And that's totally fine. They could be like, hey, if it comes up, let me know. Afterwards, say, oh, I really enjoyed when we had those small emotional moments that don't necessarily move the story along, but with the school friend, you're like, great, for next time, I'll make sure to build that in, perhaps, to have that little encounter, check in with family. That's always quite cool as well.
If you, for example, are working with somebody who doesn't want to do a session 0 for whatever reason, this could kind of serve as your session 0 to some extent, because it can show them like, oh, I really like, once we got to the combat stuff, it was just like not for me. Or, oh, I was having a blast. And then every time I had to like talk in character, I was just like, no, thanks. And since, again, this is something you can get through in a night, in an evening, you can get a lot of information really fast, which is great.
So those are sort of the 3 sort of main parts of part 1. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Ty. Can you tell us what happens in part 2?
Yes. So part 1 ends with you using a teleportation spell to teleport to this festival somewhere. But your little antique amulet that you've always worn for whatever reason, mysterious amulet, bursts with light as the teleportation spell happens, and you get dumped somewhere completely else, not planned, and you find yourself in front of a dungeon.
Yes.
There's not going to be any dragons in this adventure, but there is a dungeon.
One. Yes.
And it's up on a mountainside. So obviously, like if you were to just try to go down the mountain, you'd probably, maybe you'd die, from server. So you might as well go inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very specifically designed to be here in part 1. We're going to introduce you to the 3 pillars of D&D. And now we're taking the training wheels off. You no longer are with any of your friends or colleagues unless you decided to bring your, childhood friend along.
Oh, gosh. Fine.
Fine. And you immediately, you're somewhere you don't know anybody. As far as you know, you're completely alone. But you see that there's a little spoilers. There's a little door on this dungeon that has the same runes as your amulet.
What?
And so that creates a little mystery, like, ooh, there's something going on. And so it just, at that point, you're just going inside, you're exploring, and then there's a big boss battle at the end. Boom, bing, bang, boom.
Yeah.
Awesome.
What's key here was maybe missing from that first part, not that the first part needs it, because you've got enough, like you said, as an introductory level. There's like puzzles, a sort of thing. Like,
yes.
It just feels like when you step into that first room, this sort of room, the receiving room, and you have maps as well, so you can show the players your maps. And it feels a little bit like an escape room, because obviously there is a secret door that they might see, but they might not see. So, but it tells you about how to help them out if they, if they're struggling to get frustrated, because obviously no one wants to be stuck on a mountain for the rest of it. And there's a little bit of combat as well. There's some ice mephits. So you get mephits, some small icy things which are not good news.
Ice mephits, when you kill them, they blow up and they cause damage. And they were giving advice, which is very, hey, as somebody who has run these one-player games, this is very good advice. Tone down the damage. So they say like, hey, if you roll a crit 20 as a baddie, maybe don't do that double damage.
Yeah.
When the mephit dies and does that extra damage and could potentially kill the player, maybe they just blow up without having any sort of mechanical reason. It's just a flavorful explosion.
Yeah.
And that is very important information. One thing I love as a DM, I love being surprised by my players. I love going into stuff not knowing what spells they have, what HP they have, anything like that. But you need to know HP when you're playing with one person.
Absolutely.
Because it's fine to knock somebody to 0, but you need to know that you might do it. And you have to have a plan. Yeah,
because you don't want it game over and then that's it. You don't want to the GTA, the Elden Ring thing or whatever. So they won't. There's not really a way to come back from it. I mean, sure you could say that, but it's a bit not very fun for the player. But that's interesting that because I did read that about if you get a natural 20, don't do the damage. I completely agree with that. But it makes me think about when I do lower level play, and I used to do it for a long time, like when I did one shots and stuff, lower level play, because I thought that's easiest to run. But I used to be so scared of combat as a result of it, because I didn't want to throw things that would hurt my players too badly. I wanted them to have a decent fight. So I actually find lower level combat much harder to judge. I don't know how you find it, especially when it's like obviously level 1, level 2, but even like levels 3 to 5, I really struggle. Sometimes it'll be a complete pushover because they've got magic items or whatever. But then sometimes they'll come up against something and that's it. What I found with higher level stuff, so the Radiant Citadel one shot we've been doing, it's level 14, and I've treated them and they've gone up to 15 and 16. It's so much more fun for me because obviously they'll wail on these creatures, very successfully. They've got 25 to hit, and you're like, yeah, okay, that hits. But then the creatures don't go down, and I can then give it back in kind, and it's so much more enjoyable. And I don't know. I don't know if you found that at all. Like, so when you obviously you're doing your one-on-one stuff, is it lower level or do you organize what level it is between you?
Yeah. So I find personally, I enjoy having the world be fairly low magic, low level. And there's lore reasons for that, but mostly it's just because I find that easier to manage. Personally, for world building purposes, I find that easier to manage. That being said, when I bring somebody onto the show, I usually introduce people at level. I tell people you can make your character level 3 to level 5. You can do whatever you want, whatever makes you comfortable, but let me know what level you choose so that I can scale things accordingly.
Right.
And then if somebody comes back, for a future, for a sequel quest, which has happened a couple of times, then I bump them up.
Oh,
but
cool.
I love that personally because for 2 reasons. One, it means that because the world is populated by like the equivalent of level 1, level 2 people, it allows the players to shine.
Yes.
And without being gods,
Yes. Yeah.
And then the second thing is I don't have a lot of combat in SCQ. I think in a 98 episodes, I would guess that we have had combat in 10 of those.
Wow, that's quite impressive. Yeah, it makes sense, I guess, because if you bring them back, you don't have the time and all that sort of thing, and then that's not where the story goes. Sounds like great.
Yeah. We have the show generally. Maybe it's more. Maybe it would be closer to 20 or 25. But regardless, the show tends to focus on role play and exploration more so than combat. But that also means that when there is combat, because everybody's lower level, there is an immediate fear of combat, which encourages people to find narrative solutions.
Good.
Which tends to be more interesting for a podcast.
100%.
Yeah. So like I have had situations where where combat has started, initiative has started, and a player has been like, oh, if this person gets 2 good hits on me, I'm down. So in between every fight, every attack, they were trying to talk to the person to be like, hey, maybe we just talk this out. And that just made for so much more interesting listening experience. Obviously, like, I think that combat can be incredibly interesting and incredibly fun just in general. But I know that some of the people some of my friends that are listening to the show are listening to it more for the plot and the story and don't really care about the D&D side. And so I want to make something nice for them too.
Again, there's no right or wrong on this at all. And I completely agree. Some people live for the combat. Like I definitely get into it and definitely work it out. But if you're listening to it, sometimes it gets to a point where you're like, oh, does a 20 hit? Yes, it hits. Okay, I do this much damage. Without that narrative stuff, it gets really dry. And that's why there's definitely some actual plays. Obviously, I know like Critical Role. Dimension 20 does it really well as well. This idea, they will almost over-describe what is happening, make it cinematic. So again, I love that idea of your player saying, let's talk it out, because it feels so cinematic, like they're fighting, but they're also like, oh no, they're trying, it feels movie-like. And I think that's what a lot of people nowadays who are coming to D&D, coming to role-playing games, that's what they want. And that's what's, I don't want to say popular or a trend. It's not that. I think that's what people really enjoy about it. Whilst the combat also serves its own place elsewhere. I definitely enjoy doing combat in my games that are off stream, off podcast stuff, because then it means I can get into the nitty gritty, and it doesn't matter if we're waiting around for 15 minutes for me to read up my character sheet. The only other thing I sort of wanted to comment about before going on to that, like you said, the big finale of the boss. So there is this sort of antechamber where you get to do that role play again with the door, this magical door.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot about that. I was thinking, I know there was role play in this. I cannot remember it. But no, that's a very... Okay, sorry, continue.
No. Because this is the thing. I love role-playing creatures that are... It's not... And I don't want to say it's low intelligence or anything like that, but they don't know the answer. So they're just playing like honestly and truthfully, but they don't have the answer. So this idea that door does not know how to open itself. And obviously, like with most published adventures and stuff, it'll be like, here are some questions that your player may ask you. Here are some answers. So this idea, like, who were your makers? Are like, that is such a good question. Well, they didn't tell me their names, but they almost never smiled. And when they did, it seemed very mean and creepy. I like you much better. And it's like this idea of moving the story along to be about the player rather than like getting through. And it's like, it's a social encounter, right? It's that idea of trying to get through and work out what it is, which they should be able to read, above the door is the answer. But I love the idea that, because it's the door that has to say the word open. But I love the idea, it's like, no, you need to say this word. What word? Why would I say that? And like have that little play. Again, it depends on how much role play your player is doing, obviously. But yeah, I just love that idea of just there's back and forth a little bit, like almost like a sword fight, but with words, a word play. There you go. That's what I was thinking of.
It's so smart. It's such a great way to figure that in, because it is a social encounter that doesn't disrupt the reality of this world being like an isolated thing. No. And it's a role play encounter that the player has to get through. They can't just avoid, they have to do it. But it's also a puzzle. Mm-hmm. And it's also like exploration. Mm. So even if they didn't really enjoy the first role play, they're not going to have the reaction of like, oh, come on, you're making me talk to somebody again. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's a puzzle. So it's part of the game. Yeah. So even if they're not enjoying the improv, the acting, they'll still see the point of it. And maybe give it another shot and maybe realize, oh, actually, I do like this.
That's such a good point, this idea that, there is a point to it. It's not like, because we've just talked about it just now, this idea that some episodes which are just pure social interaction, you have your shopping episodes, some people absolutely love that. Some people cannot abide it. They want to get on with it. So this idea that there is a purpose to this puzzle and you can't move about it. And again, it's that idea that whether you spend 2 minutes on it or 10 minutes on it, it kind of doesn't matter. So I like that.
It's not taking away from the adventure. It is the adventure.
Right, exactly that. And it fits in so well, such a very smart little move. And then finally, like you said, there is this big sort of giant frost giant, I think it is, or frost giant statue, that starts to come alive. But then your newfound friend, they are described as, let me get it up here.
Oh, I've just spilled all of my notes everywhere.
No! Oh no, you fool! Yes, a crystalline paladin. This idea that this creature was made of stone, and then your amulet, I think it is, that sort of interacts with the runes around them, and they start to break free and become unpetrified. Again, doesn't give you too much in terms of what this person does. They're Garen Bronson. So again, I like that idea that it could be a character that doesn't talk very much, or it's just like, I'm just here to fight, or does like The Witcher, like one word, like run, that sort of thing.
Run.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I'm working with a professional here. That's great. But then the sort of final fight, in quotation marks, obviously you have a few more of those ice creatures come back, perhaps, but then the frost giant statue starts to come to life. Now, I don't know if you know much about frost giants in general, but they're pretty rough. They're pretty rough. They would crush a level 1 character. So the fact there's no point in fighting it, even though it's a statue. So I like the idea. It says like, as it comes to life, make it clear that they should run. And I think that's another good point, is that you don't have to fight everything in D&D. There are times when you're like, we're outnumbered, we need to go. And escape is the point of it. So I just like this idea that it talks about like, it starts to move and it crushes one of the final ice creature under its foot. And that's the clue that it's like a small
this thing that took me so many hits to defeat, it just is dead. It's just
exactly
gone. There's a text block that they have that says, we do not have specific stats for the frost giant statue. It represents only a force to be escaped. Yep. Fighting is certain death.
Yep.
and I think it's a really good little guide, because if I was DMing this for the first time, and if my player, it says over and over in this, the player will die if they fight the frost giant. They will die. They will die. They are supposed to run. If it had stats and didn't say that, I think, and the player tried to fight it, I feel like I would let them. Mm-hmm. And I think that what this is saying is like, you can have them roll, and just like, if they want to try to attack it or whatever, everything they do, you're acting like it's not even phasing this thing.
Absolutely.
Which is a nice little, like a little nudge to the newbie DM running this. You cannot act like they have a chance. They don't have a chance. If you act like they have a chance, you are hurting them.
Absolutely agree. And the way you get out, you roll on this sort of the giant escape table, and they have to do 3 successive. So again, you have that sort of almost Indiana Jones moment, like you're rushing through, you got to dodge like a big sort of frost swing. You got to climb the rope to get out. It's all there.
I love skill challenges. They are my favorite thing in D&D. Anybody that's listened to SQ in the last year will know this. They are the best. Love it. So I'm glad that they incorporated something kind of like that into here.
And it makes sense because, like you said, like you don't want it to be like, oh, they try and fight this creature, because, like you said, combat is only, well, as we said, combat is only one pillar, right? And also, if they've built a character and then they don't get to use their skills, it feels kind of pointless. Finally, we end on a cliffhanger. This idea that you make it out into the snow, into the mountain where the mountain peak, and you're like, oh, you're safe. And then this huge statue pulls itself out, proper, I feel like Godzilla style or King Kong style.
Yeah.
and then it swings at you, but then it strikes the ground, and you start to fall in an avalanche, and then that's it. That's the fade to black moment, and you're like, whoa, what next? Great.
The one thing that I will say, and I did not think of this until you were describing this, they should have ended on a literal cliffhanger of like you're falling in this avalanche, you grab like a cliff and you're holding onto it, and then it fades to black.
Yeah, you have yourself, you have your new warrior friend, and then you have Remy at the back, like all the three of you.
That'd be so good.
That'd be so good. Oh, well, thank you so much, Ty, for introducing me to this. I think like when I was looking for, like, I'm a really big fan of doing one-on-one sessions and doing D&D for newbies and stuff like that. But there isn't, as far as I'm aware, again, this is me saying it, I'm not an expert, there doesn't seem to be any official 5th edition, here is a one-on-one player. I think there are solo ones, but
as far as I'm aware, you're right. I don't know of any examples.
Because obviously I know there's this big push by like, oh, well, you can have sidekicks and stuff, which is absolutely fair. But it's nice to read something like you said. It's very tight, it's very easy, it's very flexible, and it has a lot there. And it doesn't punish players for trying out new things or anything like that. And it's only one in a trilogy as well, so you could continue the story going on.
When we're talking right now, it is in October, and one of the other options these people had were these horror-themed one-player adventures. I feel like I might check those out because I love me a horror-themed D&D adventure, and based off of how this went, I think that these guys are professionals in designing little one-player games. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. That's lovely. I love that. So so that is D&D Duet is their website, dndduet.com, and that is Jonathan and Beth Ball. We'll put a link to their stuff in the show notes. But Ty, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to say that's the end of the episode because we have gone through this. It's been an absolute joy to meet you, and it's been an absolute joy to talk to you and discuss all D&D things with you. Before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to plug? Where can we listen to and find out more about Side Character Quest?
So you can find Side Character Quest on all of your favorite podcast apps. You can also find it at sidecharacterquest.com. I am on Twitter as Win Lose Ty. That's Ty TY. And then my podcast is on Twitter at SCQ Podcast. Really, truly take a listen to Side Character Quest. I promise it is good. If you listen to it a quest and you're like, oh, this isn't for me, send me a tweet and I will give you a custom recommendation. Tell me what you didn't like about it, and I'll give you one that I think will fit with you.
That's awesome. When I'm not getting people's names wrong and podcast names wrong, and then talking very excitedly about D&D for an hour, you can find me on the What Am I Rolling podcast, which is a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it's going very well. Oh, let me tell you, Ty, there are so many systems. There are so many systems that I'm doing and running now. We've had lots of interviews that have come out from Free League publications. They've been doing stuff like Into the Odd. They've done Dragonbane, which is Sweden's #1 RPG. So instead of having Dungeons and Dragons, they had Dragonbane, which is a really fun, exciting. Really? Yeah, it's really fun and exciting. There's for them, because in the original, I'm going to get this right. Believe it's in the original Swedish. It was called Drakendemor, which is
that sounds good.
Dragons and demons, and I'm going to get this wrong now. So I believe you roll a d20. If you got a 1, that's a demon, and if you got a 20, it's a dragon. I think that's how it was. Recommend it. They've got the quick start out now. Unfortunately, the Kickstarter for that is finished, but it will be out soon. It's a very exciting time for them. So that's Free League stuff, and other one shots will be out soon. Finally, also, we have an offer code for Third Space Gaming, your friendly local game store in Burnley. So my neck of the woods, unfortunately, Ty, they don't give anything to the US, but I'm sure you have friendly local game stores. So you can go look at those. If you type in the offer code DMBC into checkout, you can get 10% off your first order. Dragonlance is probably going to be out by this time this comes out, so maybe put the pre-order on that. But if not, there'll be Terrain and stuff. But also go check out if they've got any one-on-one games, perhaps. And maybe they'll have probably with friendly local game stores, you can order through certain RPGs. So maybe Starcrossed would also be a good one to check in on that one. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. This has been delightful.